announced, and this is pretty much first thing.
Okay. Yeah, I was trying to do some just background while I was busy today. Like, oh, let me check and see if they've done anything else so that I have like an idea of maybe what questions they've already been asked and that sort of thing. And I couldn't find anything. All right. Here we go.
Yeah, you didn't miss anything there. There was nothing to be found.
Cool.
Which is actually good because we're going to talk about this because I have it in there, but like we never heard about any of this until Sony announced it, which is a kind of a rarity these days. Usually you get like little rumors about something coming up, and then there was nothing, and there was boom, and I was like, oh shit. So,
and think, and DJ, you can remind me, or guys, if you want to, let me know. There was something we can't talk about. I just don't remember what it was, or that you guys didn't want to talk about. Is that correct?
I don't know what Blake would have sent you. We can steer the conversation back. I think the big thing is we're probably not diving into like super specifics on gameplay stuff right now, right? Like
yeah. So
okay,
the rundown I got from Blake was like gameplay loop. Most of it you probably don't want to talk about, and then relationship with Sony was another one he didn't want to talk about.
Okay.
So
cool. Well, corporate relationship. Then I really can't.
Yeah, I mean, like if you ask, you're just gonna get a boring canned answer. So
exactly. Yeah, whatever print copy they give you for that.
All right. Well, you guys are all ready.
Sure.
Yeah.
T.
Yeah, I'm good. I am gonna let you guys kind of introduce yourself. Like, I'll probably just be like, "Hey, we've got Seth and Alex from Ironwood Studios," and you guys are welcome to kind of let us know like who you are and what you do.
How detailed?
Like 30 minutes
we don't
each,
have
I assume, right?
Cool, great.
Yeah. Whatever you want,
my
man.
monologue.
Yeah. If you got like a D&D character backstory ready, you can just let that go.
Yeah, exactly. No, that'd be far cooler than.
I mean, anything goes. So it's really. If you want to swear, you can swear. It don't really matter. We try to be authentic. So.
Oh yeah, I'm ready whenever you are, DJ.
Yeah, give me a 3-second delay, and then before you hit the thing.
It always feels weird when I just have to go off the cuff. Sorry. All right. And we're live. So welcome back to Pores and Pixels. I'm Tyler.
DJ here.
DJ's always there with a slight delay. And tonight we're going to be sitting down to talk with the guys from Ironwood Studios about their new game, Pacific Drive. So Seth, Alex, welcome to the show.
Thanks.
Thank you.
In just a second, I want to talk to both just kind of about like your personal experience and like what you guys do at the studio and that sort of thing. But we actually have a super cool sponsor for tonight's episode. And DJ, I'm going to kind of let you talk through this. So take it away.
Yes. So this episode is sponsored by Cova Brewing Company. It is an awesome brewery here in Norfolk, Virginia. They were nice enough to give me some beer to use for this for the podcast tonight. So I'm going to talk about the beer I'm drinking right now.
Before you start that, did you ask them, is it Coastal Virginia? Is that what it stands for?
I did not ask them. I assume it's Cova means Coastal Virginia, but
yeah.
I'll Google that later.
Continue.
But tonight I'm drinking it's called Shuby Cold IPA. It's really good. I don't know what a cold IPA was. I'm going to read the description here because I don't understand beer science. But so Shuby is Cova's take on an emerging style of IPA known as a cold IPA, made with lager yeast and two-row malt, but a cross between West Coast and hazy variations. Hops used are Idaho Gem and Citra, which makes for a tropical citrus aroma with a dry, pleasant bitterness and taste. And that description might be perfect for what it tastes like, because you do get like the citrus elements, but you still get that bitterness that most people who drink IPAs like in IPAs. It's really good. I've had 3 of these since they gave them to me, because they're pretty solid for IPAs. I'm very happy with it. Thank you to Cova. Cool. For sponsoring the episode.
Yeah,
and
we appreciate it.
People.
And we are looking to other local breweries in both areas, and honestly non-local breweries too, just as we kind of get in touch with folks. So thanks Cova for taking on our first sponsorship, and DJ seems to be really enjoying the cold IPA. So
Second one,
by the way, that a cold IPA might be What's up?
So that was second.
You got it all
one
nice.
in a ice on cup. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I thought when you first told me it was a cold IPA, I was like, all right, we've gone too far. Like you can't.
Yeah.
From what I know
can't
about
be a
brewing beer,
buzzword.
it can't be like a cold brew coffee, right? Like this is not a thing. So, anyway,
Oh, man. Yeah.
well, Seth, Alex, one of you, feel free to kick it off. What?
I've got here a can of Night Shift's DDH double IPA Haze Maze. They're out of Boston, brewery that I found when I was still living there, and now that I'm back on the East Coast in New York, it's exciting to be able to get their beer at the markets again.
What were they called? What was the brewery?
Night Shift Brewing.
Night Shift Brewing. I actually feel like I might have had something from them at some point, but I don't.
They've started distributing more and more over the past few years. Santilli,
how long have they been around?
And like I think they started somewhere around like 2010 in that vicinity.
Oh yeah, we might have definitely had it before.
I think I had some of that. We were both stationed in Groton, Connecticut, like up that way, and I feel like I probably had. That just sounds really familiar to me, so I'm thinking I might have had some from them.
Yeah, I think they make their way down to Connecticut. So,
Alex, what about you?
Alex?
I was planning on grabbing one of the local IPAs here, but I completely forgot, and so I'm drinking a Franziskaner Weiss beer. That's my.
Oh, beautiful.
The
Oh,
good old
I like
fashioned
the bottle.
Yeah,
I'm a big fan of drinking beer out of a glass too, actually, occasionally. So
I figured
that
like
had
Weiss beer,
a
you gotta
good
do
present.
like the tall glass, yeah.
Yeah. No, it looks great.
Tyler has some fancy glasses for his drink, so he's all about that.
Yeah, I'm a big whiskey guy generally. So for like the next little bit, I'm trying to switch my gears over to like some of the breweries. I have 32 breweries within 35 minutes of a drive of me, and so I'm trying to get something from each one of them over the next little bit. But
they got to open 3 more so you can have minute and brewery number parity.
I need the ratio to be 1-to-1 exactly. But yeah, so I'm actually doing, since it's our first recorded episode in October, I'm going to have this is Gizmo, or I'm sorry, not Gizmo, it's Crank Arm Brewing, their Sprocktoberfest. And it's just like a kind of a traditional lager beer, fest beer, whatever you want to call it. So I'm so confused. Hold on.
What?
No, okay, Crank. Oh, that's interesting. So, for a second, this is what did I say? Did I say Gizmo? No, it's Crank Arm. Okay, anyway, there's so many breweries around here that some of their names get really mixed up. But I thought it said Crank Arm on the front and Gizmo on the back, and I was like, did one of them brew it and the other one can it? Like I'm confused here, but I'm just in fact kind of an idiot sometimes. So,
Alex, you're a bit of a beer guru, right?
Well, I would not go that far, but I do like beer. And I know
That's
I
us too.
used to. I like checking out the local breweries, but back before games, I worked for an Anheuser-Busch distributing company in Portland, and they did like InBev products and AB and like a bunch of other local stuff. And that definitely got me interested.
I mean, the area
trying
you
to
live in
figure out-
is beer heavy. I mean, oh man, how many breweries do you think are in that
awesome.
area?
I don't want to count. I don't want to look.
Yeah,
It's
there's a lot.
probably, yeah. And I mean, it's just more and more, right? Like I don't know if it's a generational thing. Like I talked to my friends that I was in high school with, and like, oh yeah, when I retire, I just want to open up a brewery somewhere. Like, it's
You and everyone else.
yeah, it's a popular pastime. I mean, hell, that was what I tried to do in the pandemic was to start brewing beer, and I only exploded one tall boy.
Congratulations, that's
completely.
pretty
Yeah,
good.
it wasn't too bad. But yeah, it's popular.
I
Yeah,
actually
I
have
went
been
to-
thinking about that more and more lately, trying to brew my own. And then I think getting back to like what you're saying, like, oh, it just seems like it would be like a fun thing to do. I think like you get to work with your hands to some degree, right? On it to it. And then it's not like a lot of like digital work nowadays. I feel like I work on a computer all day, but like it's hard for me to tell you what the finished product is, because you can't put hands on it a lot of times. In game development, I guess it's a little different. because you guys do have a end product eventually that you can like be like,
I've been
look what we
trying
did.
for years to figure out how to put my hands on the video game, and I haven't gotten it yet.
yeah. Well,
you got to go back like 30 years and then or that phased out. Well, I mean, what I did, Tyler, was I originally did it for a Father's Day gift for my dad because he was in Portland. He was isolating, so I got him like a beer making kit, and I bought the same one. We both made beer together, and then we got to try each other's beer. And his turned
like
out
swapped them. Yeah.
Yeah, like his turned out legitimately solid. He had done it in college. Mine was a horrible attempt at making an IPA that just turned into some insanely strong triple IPA somehow. I don't quite know what happened. And we've repeated that process a few times actually. It's been fun.
Yeah, that sounds actually like that. I could see that being like a fun annual. Hey, we're all getting together for Thanksgiving, right? Like bring your best brew kind of gig. That's interesting. My dad is. I guess distilling is probably more accurate in the Carolinas, and they do, all manner of. I guess it's technically moonshine, but they tried to like get crafty and make like peach brandies, and they're big into making like homemade wines and stuff right now too. But he told me one night that he thought someone like broke in the house because he said he was just asleep, and then he heard like these like 5 like repeated explosions, and it was like over, I guess I was gonna say compressed, but like, too much CO2 loaded into wine bottles, and he had like 5 in a row that just in the middle of the evening, which I guess is terrible.
That is
Bit of
what
an
happens.
aside there.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I said right before we hit record, I was like, hey, sometimes we trail off. So, example
It's
A.
all right. It's the fun of doing a live show, though.
Yeah, that's true.
I'll tell you what, Alex, I'm going to start with you because you're at the top of my list here. But tell me just a little bit about like your experience in the gaming world and kind of what you're doing on the game now.
Yeah. So, I've been making games for a little over 10 years. I started out working on more on the environment art side of things. I was working on Planet Side 2 down in San Diego. Went from there to Sucker Punch, where I was still on the environment side, and I've worked on Infamous Second Son and First Light. And I've been slowly transitioning more and more into effects stuff. So I ended up joining Oculus, where I was heading up a VFX team on one of their internal teams, and we made First Contact and a bunch of other stuff. And and then eventually made the big jump, and which I think we'll talk about a bit right before the pandemic. I switched gears, and what eventually became Ironwood was started.
That's awesome.
But yeah, my background is definitely like art and tech with a passion for stories. Like I tell people, I make shiny things with technical things.
That's good.
It works.
Pretty solid as elevator pitches go. Interestingly enough, Planet Side 2 was the very first PC game that I ever downloaded.
Oh dang.
Yeah, I had a buddy of mine who was like, hey, check this game out. It's free, right? And you can play it and see what you think. And I downloaded it and was instantly like, oh my God. Like, this is my first exposure to what a free game was. I think this was in like first PC. And I was like, this is actually good. Much when he told me it was free. I didn't know that was a thing where people made free games. And now I know, obviously, that like free games are like the thing to do now, and you slam microtransactions in and make a ton of money. But Planet Side 2 was like way before that whole wave, and I was pretty blown away by it actually. And then the other thing that you said about being over at Sucker Punch. So I don't think that you mentioned this game, and you might not have. That most Ghost of Tsushima is like one of my favorite releases in like the last I don't know. I thought that game was brilliant, so that's kind of a cool tie-in.
Yeah, I mean that team is very talented. Like there's super awesome people over there. That was definitely after my time though.
Yeah, cool. Well, either way, like I said, I'm a fan of the studio now, having played that, and I think that's just a neat kind of tie-in. But Seth, tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you kind of get into the gaming industry, and what's been your experience over with Ironwood as well?
Yeah, so Alex and I linked up. Mutual friend introduced us. Alex at that point didn't have any idea what my background was, And our first conversation, he was telling me a little about the game and some of the inspirations, and he just mentioned by chance that Don't Starve was a point of inspiration. I was like, oh, okay, I think this might work out. So for anyone that's playing a little catch up there, I worked at Clay Entertainment on Don't Starve and Don't Starve Together for a while, a few years back. But rewinding a little bit, even more before that, I've been making games for about 10 years now. My first kind of proper job in the industry was on Bioshock Infinite at Irrational Games. Started out in QA, and after about a year, moved in over to the design team. Initially working on the multiplayer mode that got cut, and then pretty quickly transitioning to work on Elizabeth, the companion character in the game, kind of doing like character design through level design, and working with the other folks on the little strike team we had to make her just feel, like as alive and present as we could. And then from there, I went on to
as a player, I think you nailed it. Just wanted to say
cheers.
that.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, I was a big fan of that game.
I remember when the I think it was the E3 trailer for Last of Us came out before we had released, because we came out first, and it was like a 15-minute gameplay demo, and our whole team was just like poring over all the little snippets of what Ellie was doing. We were like, what are they doing? What can we steal? So it was a pretty exciting time, just kind of like in this sort of arms race of making compelling companion characters that were highly systemic.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. That'd be a good deal from too if you were going to, because the game's brilliant as well.
I think it was probably flowing both ways. I've since talked to some of the folks that have worked on Ellie, and it's fun trading kind of war stories as they were solving some of the same problems in parallel.
Yeah, that's interesting. I never thought about that actually, but that's a good point. Like those came out pretty close together, I think.
Yeah, I think it was like 6 months of separation thereabouts. I don't remember exactly.
Yeah. Well,
you also worked on one of my favorite game series. You worked on Mafia 3, right?
Yeah, so after Bioshock Infinite, I went over to Clay and worked on various Don't Starve things for a few years, and then jumped down to the Bay Area to work on Mafia 3, where I was working on the kind of living world, like making a whole city feel alive and reactive this time, which has some similarities and some not so similarities to a single character. And then after that, I started a company with some friends. We worked on a prototype for a while, didn't manage to get it picked up. And as I was kind of like contracting around a little bit and filling my time was when I linked up with Alex and joined Ironwood, where I'm the lead designer on Pacific Drive these days.
Cool. Awesome. That's a pretty, I always think it's so interesting talking to devs about like how you get to the point where you are, right? Because like everybody touches so many different things. And this is the first time actually, I think, DJ played something from both that both people have worked on, and that's not something that happens like a lot of times when we've interviewed people, right? I'll know about them, but I might not have ever put hands on some stuff that they've played before. So it's interesting. A couple of episodes we've had like multiple guests on at the same time. I've never had the experience of having played both, something that both of them worked on. So
yeah, the route that game devs take is also pretty insane too. Like when we had Drew on, he worked on like a kid's mobile game, and then he's making this like horror game. He's mocapping shit in his apartment.
Like, let's go the opposite direction.
Like, how do you go from that to that? And then what I noticed because we vet everyone that goes through, because we want to talk to the people we wanted to come on the show. And that sounds weird to say, but when I was looking at, that's why I knew about your Mafia 3 thing, is because I research everyone that comes on the show.
DJ's our resident stalker here at Force and Pixels.
Yeah,
looks you up online and figures out when you didn't pay your taxes and things like that. So.
But you guys have a cool thing on your website, and I don't talk about it here. I was trying to get a question in about it, but the very part of your website, it's like these are the games that our team has worked on previously, and it's everything. It's like Oblivion to like Mafia 3, Bioshock, like all this stuff. There's so many games. There's probably like 30, 40, maybe 50 games just on that little image you guys have. And I think that was pretty cool. That's another reason why I reached out to you guys in the first place.
Yeah, I'll have to get over there and check that out. I haven't seen that yet.
Yeah,
I think like one of the things we kind of set out to do when we were doing the show was like, hey, like I know that a lot of times that a game like the headline might be really popular, you know, where people will click it or whatever. But like if something that I personally am interested in, or like neither one of us want to play it, like it feels like a weird thing where, you know what I mean? Like I want to be passionate about this, talk to people about. So anyway, we're glad that you guys were able to join us.
Yeah, thanks for having us. We're excited to be here.
Absolutely.
Yeah, of course. So Ironwood started life kind of in 2019, right? And you guys are based out of Seattle.
Yep.
That right before, so that must have been a weird time to like found a studio, and then all of a sudden, although I guess one good thing about game development, this is just coming from the fact that I work in tech. At least we had the benefit of like remote work. I would assume is like something that was a fairly easy transition. I don't know. Maybe I'm talking out my ass here. But that said, like having a vision for a studio and not expecting COVID, how did you guys manage to kind of fight through that? And like, do you feel like it might have any effect on like the game itself, or do you feel like you guys have kind of just and have moved along?
Yeah, I mean, I can kind of take point on this. Like the reality is like Ironwood's official like first day existing as a company was like November of 2019. And when the pandemic happened, right, as I'm sure like everyone here experienced, like we didn't know what was gonna happen, right? We had gone through some early conversations, and they were starting to get promising about like ways that we can figure out a way to make the game and stuff like that, but come spring of 2020, like it became more apparent that everything was going to be a pretty big deal, right? Like this was not just like a 1 month and then it's over and we've moved on with our lives. And the in terms of like how it affected us literally was, you know, we ended up hunkering down for most of 2020 and just like working and prototyping. I mean, you mentioned like how like what it like our company values or how we would go about like planning a studio, and I think for me personally, it was more about like the values and like very high level goals than anything very specific. Like obviously there's a pipe dream of like, there's a physical place you can walk into and we got a logo and a website and stuff like that, but it was what was way more important was like we want to make a sustainable place. We want to make a place that's healthy to work at, and those are the kind of things you lean to and look towards when something bad happens. And it could be something really big and traumatic for the whole world, or it could be something individual, but like making sure that you focus on team health and like making sure that you are, you know, doing your best to avoid any kind of crunch culture, and like those are the important things to like stand your ground on. And that's what we lent into, I think, more than anything. Like, you know, it had like both micro effects and macro effects. Like, you know, on like the small scale, is it making the time? Like, one of our engineers, he was on the project really early on, and like we talked about it when it was like the middle of the most extreme isolation, and we decided, you know what, we still need to meet up and like talk about the game a little bit, and that meant that some of making, you know, Pacific Drive's earliest days was spent walking around a park, you know, 6 feet apart from each other, right?
Yeah.
And that was important for our mental health. Is that we needed that, right? And then some of it was bigger picture, right? It motivated us very early to try and get a physical space, but then in turn be very cautious about the precautions that we put in place to make sure we could still have a physical place, right? That it wasn't, you know, an unhealthy place to be.
Sure.
Yeah, and I will say that because I was over, no, just across the water from you when the pandemic started, and in the Pacific Northwest, especially, I mean, COVID hit hard there. That was like the epicenter of the United States. COVID was in Seattle, and like, I mean, the whole state. I mean, it shut
It's up
down
the
quick.
street.
Yeah, it was nuts. And I wasn't. We're what? I think Seattle and where I was at was. I mean, it's literally across the water, maybe 2 miles. Like, it's not very far. And like we felt it like hard. Like we just texted us one day and they're like, "Hey, just don't come into work anymore, like for the foreseeable future." And I was in the Navy at the time, so like a lot of that stuff I couldn't do. I still had to go to work, and that was terrible. But I mean, if I wanted to go to Seattle during that time, like you couldn't. Like the ferries weren't really running, and I mean, it was hard. It hit hard over there for a long time. A lot of stuff happened during that time in Seattle. I'm surprised you guys, like the fact that you guys went out and walked in a park, and I assume in Seattle, like that's pretty crazy because they were pretty strict over there about staying inside and staying away from people, and it's nuts.
Yeah. It's I actually have a really, this is so odd that like the timelines just kind of line up. So I started a new job in September of 2019 and was like so excited and going to the office, and it was in downtown Raleigh, which is a pretty cool place to be. So like I was really enjoying the vibe and like I was so into it, right? And then like you do essentially 5 months of work, and then all of a sudden like I went on a trip. We visited some family in South Carolina. When I came back, like it was like, don't come back ever, really, unless you feel like you really have to. And that's even, I mean, their stance now is like, hey, like if you don't feel safe, like you don't have to come to the office, which is really cool. But like, I was curious if you felt like just as you formed during that time, if there was like any hit to like feeling connected to your peers. Because I would say for me, at least in this, my other company's situation, having just started, like the time where I was really going to be getting to know the people I was working with, we were all in just like a weird, like I feel like I'm just now getting to where I like know my coworker, and it's been 2.5 years essentially. So, yeah, just kind of a weird situation.
I mean, speaking as one of the few people on our team that is not in the Seattle area, like that's a real thing. And I had worked on teams that were remote before joining Ironwood, so I was coming to it with a little bit of prior experience about like what that might look like and sort of best practices for establishing communication and having boundaries between like nighttime and daytime and when work ends and all that kind of thing. But I think even though the office over in Seattle is like open on a pretty consistent basis at this point, I'm still remote, and it is definitely the case that like I feel probably less kind of close and sort of like among the team in that way than I might if I were on site. And I've gone out there a few times, and that's been really wonderful. But I think you just kind of swallow that piece of allowing for some amount of remote work, because it allows people to like live their lives in the ways that they need to, and not necessarily, I mean, even to the point where with the original team, like one of our engineers, Scott, wasn't living in Seattle when he first joined the project. So it, even outside of COVID sort of requirements and complications, it's something that we've been grappling with and we've had experience with prior. And, we were just really careful about setting best practices and trying to make sure that, we're also making time for social game nights and stuff like that, so that because you don't get that water cooler sort of let's catch up about how your weekend was, you need to create that time a little bit here and there.
Yeah, no. So cool. And one of the, I mean, like you said, right, it comes with the territory with remote work. There's pros and cons, and like that's certainly one of the cons is you're always going to feel like a little bit on the outside.
It's interesting, and I mean it affects, it always pops up in ways that you don't think it will too, right? Like one of the things that we did, I got this as a tip from another company, like a friend works at, but like we ended up creating pretty in-depth bios for the team to put up, and it wasn't just hey, your name and your background. It was like, hey, put your favorite GIF, put like how you like to receive feedback, the kind of stuff that like is actually gives you like a little bit of inclination of like how you would like to work with someone. And that's been successful, but it even affects like interviewing. Like we ramped completely during COVID, and it dawned on us that it was like, oh, we can't do lunch interviews, which is, when you would normally just hang out with some people. And to the best that we can, we take those steps anyway, where we make sure to like schedule an interview that is not an interview. But it doesn't matter what you say, right? Like I could bring a beer to the conversation and be like, let's just, shoot the shit and hang out for a bit. But it is different, right? And like you make the best effort that you can in situations like that, but it does inherently change things.
Yeah. Well,
I think you did well.
Yeah. It obviously the game came together, right? And you guys are like
We must be
You're
doing
it,
something
right.
right.
So must have worked. Yeah.
Well,
So
I
I
feel
had
like,
Oh, go ahead, DJ. You're
yeah.
good.
So based off when I was researching the studio and using the website and all that, so what I've gathered is you guys like promote like a healthy work environment, which in the gaming industry, at least for AAA titles especially, it's not a normal thing. Like hey, like no crunching, and they're like what? Like I think your healthy work environment will help a lot with keeping that together, the whole team together, because from what we gathered from the people we've talked to, even people we've talked to behind the scenes, is that there's a lot of the industry of the big companies where it's very toxic. They don't treat the devs very well, and that affects the product in the end, right? So having like a healthy work environment and like treating your employees like people, right, who work for a living and all that, I think that will directly correlate into the final product of this game. And that's another reason we wanted to talk to you guys. It's just a cool thing. Like you guys state on your website about having like a healthy work environment, and I mean, hats off to you guys on that one. I like that a lot. So
Yeah, I was thinking that when you were talking to is that like, I mean, I'm not a game dev, but you hear the horror stories as, you know, a user or someone who keeps up with gaming news, right? Some of my favorite games that have ever come out, the Red Dead 2, right? Like Rockstar got into a little bit of some stuff about like crunch-ins and things like that. Like, you know, I don't know. It is here like, hey, like when we were like putting together, and we were founding this, right? It's just really kind of set up on some values that like we don't want to work people to death. Like this is a job at the end of the day, right? Like people have lives and families, and like while we all, you know, like, there's a whole lot more going on outside of that. That's really important, right? So I thought that was cool just as you were talking. I haven't seen your website yet, so this I thought it was super refreshing to hear that the studio was kind of founded on like, hey, we know that you're people, not robots, and you can quit coding long enough to come over and like enjoy your life some. So
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
I think you probably hear this a lot with indie devs, like veteran indie devs, of we're doing this because we are tired of doing it the way that we had been doing it at larger companies. Like a lot of the more veteran people on our team have not just read about but experienced those kind of horror show stories that you were mentioning. So it's been a real priority for us, and you know, not even just with crunch stuff, but to Alex's credit, like he's had a really proper open door policy, and I'm not going to get into particulars, but like, you know, inviting me in to have really frank and sometimes difficult conversations about like how we structure things, and allow me to like advocate for the rest of the team in that kind of way, and try and actually like not just create the sort of positive working culture and company culture that Alex kind of imagines, but making sure that we're iterating on that when there's feedback from the team.
yeah, so important to be able to go and talk to like just like and things like that, and be frank, right? Like I'm probably too candid a lot of times with my bosses, but I usually can be like, hey, so sorry, this might be like prior military stuff, and if that starts showing too much, like let me know. But I think this is kind of fucked up. So like, can we talk about it, right?
well, like,
and
from
people
my
have been pretty cool
perspective,
about
though.
it so far.
oh, go ahead, Alex.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say, like, from my perspective, like, I mean, it's a there's a lot I could probably talk about an hour about like some of the frustrating things I've seen and want to avoid. But like, I think to Seth's point about like having like the ability to receive feedback and stuff like that, like that's one of my biggest fears, right? Is like, you know, you see these headlines in just gaming websites about like, you know, companies where things have gone wrong, right? And I always like I go through the mental checklist of like, all right, how far did it get before someone ignored it, right? Like my fear is a company where people can't come and actually voice stuff. And you can say that all you want, but it means like one, it has to be like set by example, but it
Hmm.
also means that like you have to develop that as a culture. Like we've had an anonymous feedback tool since we were three people. Like we figured out a way to do it. We
He's
set
like,
up like
I
a
know
we set
one
up
of
an
you motherfuckers wrote this.
well, but the important thing is that exists, right? Like, and it's steps like that we've taken that I care about because that shit's important. Like, we make sure that it's not just a sick day; it's a mental health day as well. Like, you can take it for either, right? We don't care. Like, go. Like, if you need a day, take a day, right?
Yeah.
We don't, we don't really like dive into that part of it, but it's been really really nice to see the team start, especially on the taking care of yourself thing. Like we will message each other if we see ourselves posting late, be like, stop working. Like that has happened multiple times. I've sent that message. I've been told that message. Like, and I think the other part of it too is like is compensation, right? Like making sure that if someone wants to like go above and beyond, because that does happen. Like people will be interested in that kind of thing, making sure that it's compensated.
Yep.
And in my opinion, doing my best to try to convince people to just work normal hours. That's a thing that I have said quite a few times.
I'm curious, how many people are at the studio right now?
Physically?
Like, how many people work for Ironwood?
Yeah, can you drive to the office and go check and report back how many people are?
I was
Not
gonna
right
say
now.
I can tell you how many physical people are there. It's maybe is Blake there, but that's because he's watching this. But
yeah, he just like I mean, it's just me. I see you, Blake.
No, we're we're 10, 15 people, like somewhere
Okay.
around that mark. I think we're but then when you start to like the lines become blurry, right? Because we have people that are contracting on the project,
Yeah.
and then we have like people that are also contracting, but it's much more like freelance, where they're only here and there. We have like different like teams that we're working with externally,
Cool.
but the core of the team is small. Like we're less than 20 people.
Core team, what do you think the average tenure is in the games industry?
As in how long people have worked in the gaming industry?
Yeah.
Wildly varied.
Yeah, we're
super
really professionally diverse. Like we have folks that this is their first job. We have folks that have worked in the gaming industry longer than me and Seth. I believe, right? Maybe one of us is
Maybe.
I don't know. But
we
either
certainly
way,
have people that have worked in like adjacent industries and just jumped over to games as well.
yep,
Like
so we have
film
folks
and that
coming
sort
in
of
from
thing.
film and stuff like that. Yeah.
I have one colleague from film, and it's a cool one. It's a Lord of the Rings tie-in, and I'm just like such a big Lord of the Rings nerd, so I think it's so cool that he was like a Linux sysadmin for those films, and I was like, oh, that's
man.
fucking awesome, dude.
Our tech artists work on a bunch of really cool stuff. Like he worked on Tron and stuff like that. And
Oh, cool.
Like, it's there's but I think like to the point, right? Like I think that is a healthy thing, right? Is having folks come in, and it's been nice. Like yeah.
Yeah, sounds like an awesome place to work. Seth, I wanted to ask you, having worked on BioShock, Don't Starve, Mafia 3, that sort of thing, right? With how different the aesthetic is on all of those games, how did you, or not how did you, because I'm sure that you did maybe to some degree, but do you feel like you incorporated like something from each of those experiences into the Olympic Exclusion Zone that you guys are working on?
Yes, very much so. And I think like one of the key things that has allowed me to do so is that I'm like my background is as a systems designer. Like I'm not a very visual person. I mean, I'm happy to jump in there and like riff on ideas and kind of try and figure out what a thing might look like, but I can't generate any of that on my own. So when I tend to think about these things, I think about it from a very sort of architectural and systems and tooling standpoint. So in that respect, all three of those titles were really, really useful. I mean, just kind of taking it one by one, BioShock Infinite is a first-person game with a really rich world that has a lot of environmental storytelling and sort of like found narrative and stuff like that. That kind of invites you in by just being an interesting place. So that's like a strong parallel to our game. Don't Starve is got all the survival crafting stuff, as well as like the procedural world generation stuff. The way that those things work in our game and Don't Starve are different, obviously. Although Don't Starve is actually a 3D world, although it may not look like it. And that allowed us to do some fancy camera tricks with the Screecher horror mod that I made for that. Anyways, so yeah, Don't Starve was like all the sort of survival crafting stuff, not just from a sort of how does the game work and what are the player patterns and game loops and everything standpoint, but also from an authoring and implementation standpoint of just like how do you make tools that allow you to make a game that is big enough for a survival crafting game when you are only about 10 15 people, and the ask there for Pacific Drive is even bigger because our assets are all 3D models. So there's just, it's a bigger lift. Takes longer to do as compared to the really robust art pipeline that they developed at Clay. Not that ours isn't, but by the time I got there, like, there's a full like puppet that could just be reskinned and you get all the animations for free. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of like work smarter, not harder stuff that I picked up there. And then Mafia 3, kind of in a different way, was also it was kind of bridging some of those elements from both BioShock and Don't Starve in terms of there's a lot of procedural aspects to how we were doing the living world in Mafia 3, and also the living world was all like those smart objects that were driving the AI behaviors were with a like heavily custom tool set. And I was actually just talking to someone on the team earlier about how you kind of have to see something go wrong and see something go right to understand the value of like a proper architecture, and making sure that you're kind of prepared to have to be making content in a scalable way. And I saw the negative side there on Mafia 3 after seeing the positive side on Don't Starve. I mean, I'm pretty happy with what we were able to achieve, but the process of getting there in Mafia 3 was challenging, I'll say.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, aesthetically, like, yes, those games are really different, but I tend to kind of like glaze my eyes over and look past a lot of that stuff. I mean, Alex, I'm sure sometimes to his frustration will tell you about all the times that I've said like, I don't care what it looks like, this is what it needs to behave. So that's I approach my work from a very sort of nuts and bolts systems design and tools design standpoint, and let Alex really kind of run with it when it comes to the aesthetic pieces. So it makes it pretty easy for me in that way.
Cool.
Gotcha. So Alex, this is a question for you. So you guys announced Pacific Drive on State of Play, the most recent State of Play. We never heard any murmurs about this game before, which is a rarity in these days. Usually you get something, right? But you've been developing the game for 3 years. It's the studio's first title. So what? Like, can you talk us through what your decision making of like why announce this now, when the game's complete or before, like teasing it up? Like, can you talk us through like Sony State of Play was like the perfect timing to announce this title?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of answered your own question there, right? Like, it was a great opportunity. The long version of it is, when we started up, there's, I think, there's different kinds of like studio announcements, right? Like there is, like, I'm Cliffy B, I'm, Romero announcing a new studio level of like prestige, and that's not us, right? Like we're seasoned developers. We have an idea of what's up, but I don't think like if I send out a mysterious tweet, we're gonna get a Kotaku article out of it, right? Like that's not where we're at.
Fucking
And
Todd
because
Howard,
of that, yeah, it became a question of like what is the best possible thing for us. And while we absolutely could have announced the studio earlier, and we actually for a long time we were debating it, right? We could have focused on the team and the culture and the name and the brand and stuff like that. It wouldn't, like, it would have been something, but it would have been so much more if we could talk about like what we're actually doing, and like we can say, hey, we're passionate about like mystery and surrealism, but like it's another thing to then show that trailer. And ultimately it became this call of like, all right, let's do this all at once. And as for when we did it, it was about coming up with the coming up with the right trailer, like hitting it at the right point. We knew generally when we wanted to do it based on our long-term marketing plans and stuff like that, knowing
Sure.
when the game will be out and when we want to show more details about the game and all that stuff. And so we had started preparing, and Sony had approached us over like the showing it at the State of Play, and it was it worked out really 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 well. The response has been like mind-blowingly awesome, and it's very weird, right? Because you work on something for 3 years and you kind of forget, like that. I think that's there is a positive there, right? Like we didn't have to worry about running a Twitter, right? Like that just wasn't a thing for us, right, until a couple weeks ago, and now it is. And waiting till we were ready to do that, waiting till like we're far enough along to, come up with something bold and share with everybody. Like it was a double win there.
So 3 years you worked on the game through COVID, right? So 2/3 of its development was through COVID. So how did it feel to finally be like, hey, like we're a thing, and this is our gift to you guys? Like, how did it feel to finally like break out of the woodwork with this trailer and this announcement?
Yeah, like just tiny little tack onto that, but like, is there would secretive, right? Like, I'm assuming there was probably, I don't know if there's like NDAs for developers. I probably, right? But like,
Yes, very much so.
okay,
all
cool.
over
Yeah,
the place, constantly.
if, like the people
Relentless.
making the game have to sign them, or if like just hey, when we talk to people or have play testers or whatever, like you guys
All of
can't
the
talk about
above.
this at all. Okay,
Yes.
cool. But like, yeah, that's got to be some type of like a weight off your chest to finally be able to be like, hey, I can like at least mention this thing that I'm working on now,
Oh
because
man,
it's
yeah.
just a little bit about that.
I mean, it was. I mean, it's very very incredibly surreal and weird. Like I was in shock for like the first 2 days. Like the trailer aired and I ran out of the room to go, and I happened to like look on my screen right when like Twitter started reacting to the trailer. It's like responses, and it was. I mean, it went better than I ever could have hoped, but it's like for me, it was just nice, right? Like I've a lot of like a lot of my close friends knew that I was doing something, right? Or maybe they knew the name of the studio because we technically were a registered LLC. We had a website so that if you were applying for a job, like we didn't look like we didn't exist completely.
Sure.
But we were really
Yeah.
secretive. Like we really did not share much, and it's a huge relief to just share and be able to talk about it, not only for the team but for a lot of like our partners, right, and friends. But then there's the reception, which people have really really gotten attached to it, are asking us questions, they want to know more, and that like warms a huge part of my heart. Like it was a very emotional little period there for me. It was like holy crap, like it's out there, and in a way that I was never expecting it to be out there, with a reception way bigger than I ever could have hoped.
Yeah.
I mean, so as a person who witnessed it, it was the only game I was actually excited about. Like, besides for like the known ones we known about, like God of War and whatnot. I saw that and I was like, it's scratching an itch I didn't know I had. Like that trailer, right? I saw like the aesthetic of the Pac Northwest, and I saw like the station wagon, and I was like, oh yeah. And there's like survival. I was like, oh fuck, oh yeah. It's scratching a real deep itch like I did not know I had, and I was very excited to reach out as soon as so I saw the trailer. I told Tyler about it. He wasn't as excited as I was about it.
That's true. I
We'll
was a little
forgive
more
you.
reserved about it. I honestly want to know a
allowed.
lot more about gameplay
true.
stuff, but
So
we'll get there
Tyler,
maybe one day.
Sometimes I have to force content down his throat to get him to appreciate certain things. I mean, there's plenty of examples.
It's like a mama bird kind of relationship.
Exactly. It's like Forza.
I'm terribly picky sometimes
He
about
is, he
about
is.
my games.
He is, but I mean, he's usually thankful at the end. The Hunter Call of the Wild is one of the games I bought for him. I was like, you need to experience this, and
That's
then
true. It was a good one. But I did
Forza
did
Motorsport.
introduce you to the whole Soulsborne thing.
That's
so
true.
you're
I
welcome
wasn't a
for that.
Soulsborne guy until I met Tyler.
There you
So
go.
it's a two-way relationship.
It
But,
seems like a fair trade.
I was super excited about it, and then I don't know how I stumbled upon Seth's Twitter account, and he was part of the thing, and I messaged him, and he's like, yeah, it'd be great, but I need to talk to like the PR people. And then I stumbled on your account, Alex, and I sent you a message. I'm like, no shit, this founder's not gonna come on the show. And then you're like, yeah, that'd be great. Give me an email address, and I talked to Blake, and Blake's in the chat right now. Blake, you've been great, by the way. We sent like I don't know how many emails back and forth to each other, but he's a great PR guy. I was super excited. Honestly, this might be the most excited I've been about an upcoming game in a long time. Mostly, and I'm biased, I like indie games a lot. I think the AAA stuff is great. Don't get me wrong.
We talked about it a lot on the show.
Yeah, we do talk about it a lot, but there's a lot of passion that goes into indie projects these days in the last like 5-10 years, and like you can, for the most part, you can feel it. And man, that station wagon, it got me going. I'll be real. I loved every single second of that trailer. That station wagon, I was like, oh yeah, that's exactly what I wanted.
I got Griswold vibes.
No,
right.
not that.
All
I think station wagons are cool.
Griswold. The Griswold vibe's a good thing. That's not disparaging
It's not
here.
a Griswold thing though. It's station wagons in general.
It's the American travel icon. Yeah.
I went to college to be a mechanic, so I know about like Chevy used to make a station wagon, and it had a big ass V8 in it, and I love that shit. So like I am all about it. I'm fully in, and then survival elements, and then all the weird shit happening. Even though that stuff doesn't happen in the Pac Northwest, it's so fitting that it would be in the Pac Northwest where that shit would happen, right?
Yeah.
Yep. Checks
Like,
out.
Yeah, if you guys don't squeeze a Bigfoot in there somewhere, I'm gonna be mad.
Can neither confirm nor deny the presence of Bigfoot.
Just go ahead and tell your design team. All right.
I mean, DJ, you were talking about like watching the trailer and how it was like lighting up this part of your brain that you didn't know you had. And even back when Alex kind of showed me like that first meeting that I mentioned earlier, and he showed me like some of the footage that they had at that point, and within like 30 seconds I was like, oh, this game is gonna tickle people in a certain way. It's just like such a kind of perfect conglomeration of like specific genres and experiences that have proven to be like maybe non-obvious in certain ways. I think of like mud runners, for example, or snow runners as like that's a non-obvious driving experience, and we're not doing quite that far in terms of like deforming terrain and everything like that. But we're certainly drawing some inspiration from those kinds of things, and just kind of like bringing all of this together into a package that we think is pretty compelling, and we'll have something for the people that are excited about the car aspects, have something for people that are excited about the survival crafting aspect, have something for people that are excited about exploring the world and going through the narrative. Like it kind of hits a lot of buttons in that way. And it's even though I have less of kind of a personal emotional connection to the game as compared to Alex, who's he's been living in the Pacific Northwest for a long time. He's got a car that bears some similarity to our car.
Really? You gotta send me a picture.
It was still super exciting just to see all those positive reactions and like have the proof positive that sort of weird ball of genres and mechanics and features that we've been working on does connect with people.
It's kind of a big moment if you think about it, because that state of play, your game was the only indie game announced, right? You're the only indie studio that was announced at that state of play, and it had a lot of positive feedback. How did that feel, like knowing that you were the only indie game that was announced that day, like in that state of play, and that it did have such like a positive impact on like social media, like Twitter, and like consumers who are excited to see it?
I mean, my first thought was, oh no, are people gonna think we're not indie?
I'll be honest. I'll be honest. Initially, I did not know that you guys were an indie studio when I saw the trailer.
I didn't.
Yeah, I mean, credit to Alex and all of our team on that. So.
Yeah, it's I mean, we also didn't know, so like until it aired, it was we knew we'd be in it, and then like they shared like the number of titles on Twitter. I think they said like 10 games, and like we're like, oh, okay, yeah, I mean, we were super floored and humbled, right? Like all these awesome like Harry Potter, like God of War, like Pacific Traveler.
It's a hell of a stage to show off on.
Yeah,
it is true.
Holy crap.
Tekken 8 was on there too, right?
Sorry.
Well, Tekken, yeah,
Tekken 8 was on
Yeah.
there too. Like that was a heavy hitting state of play, and then it was like, here's this station wagon game about surviving, and
Yep.
but people
Yep.
were fucking
Yeah.
psyched about it, man.
I'm psyched about it. I'm personally, I am. I mean, whenever you guys drop pre-orders, if you guys need play testers, let me know.
Oh, yeah, DJ's all
There
about
will
it.
come a time.
Go.
Yeah,
Sign all the
it's,
NDAs you need.
But to answer your question about like how did it change things a little bit, like I mean everyone obviously on a personal level I think is thrilled with how it's done and thrilled they can talk about it. Like one of the things that I do a lot of is I'm reaching out to all these different musicians because we're putting real musicians in the game. And now I don't have to put an NDA in place. Now I can be like, and there's a trailer, and that definitely makes conversations easier as like a
Yeah.
very literal example of like a you know a fun improvement based on we exist, which I'm very happy about.
Well, if you guys
So-
need a musician, we know a guy. I'm not gonna say his name, but we know a guy.
So we do know a guy, although
We do.
I have to background in music, and his like focus right now is not the American
No.
Pacific
I
Northwest.
think he would be down for it. I really do. I think he'd be down for it because he wants to experience like every genre of music
That
like
is true.
all
That
over
was-
the world. He's a
that
very
was the thing
cultured
we
man.
talked about.
Yeah, send me names. I've been like scouring like all kinds of like you know different Pacific Northwest music groups and stuff like that, and chatting with the team. And then whenever I talk to a musician, asking them about people they know. It's been honestly it's been a lot of fun. It's very different from pretty much anything I've ever done. It's like it's not like making art. It's also not like talking to business folks or even doing like interviews or something like that. It's like just like I'm almost like vibing about the game, right? Like oh okay, like with you know what is the feel of this? Like you know people care that it's like this non-violent game, right? Like we're not putting any kind of like you know weaponry on the car, right? And I think yeah,
got bumpers,
honestly
right?
been wonderful. Sorry.
Yeah,
bumpers
the
on
car
there, right?
itself can be a weapon in a way.
Just checking.
but,
No, just checking.
Yeah. The car does
like,
have
no,
bumpers.
no
and I
machine
can
gun
confirm
headlights.
Yeah,
Exactly.
That's fair. That's fair.
It is not a Bond
Listen,
car.
In the Pac Northwest, a car is more than a weapon up there. I mean,
People
drivers up
driving in
there
the
were-
rain. Yep, it's
yeah.
I was
It's an
gonna ask-
experience.
Like talking about just music is, I mean, we're totally spitballing now, but like what is the vibe of like the music that you guys are looking for? Or can you
Oh,
talk
man.
about that? If not, it's fine.
You know, I think I will. I'll give a pretty vague answer for right now, just because
Okay.
it
Cool,
tends to be a
vague.
pretty complicated creative process, and there's, you know, we've got all different aspects in there, but generally like, if it sounds like the kind of thing that should be coming out of the radio in that trailer, right? Like in this old station wagon as you're driving down like weird, creepy woods that you don't know what's out there, like that has been a pretty solid razor for that. And so
man.
here's a good example of something that doesn't necessarily fit very well is like very, very modern like auto-tuned like music or like
Yeah.
pop music, something like that. That is heading in the opposite direction.
Yeah, more like 5 years ago auto-tune.
Yeah,
Fair
there
enough.
you go. Seth gets it.
Yeah.
Have you
I'm
guys
wearing,
reached out to Dave Grohl at all?
Oh man, I think that's beyond
That
our.
might be a budgetary
Listen.
limitation.
Guys,
I
just
would
ask
send.
people that listen to this thing, and you guys were like, yeah, sure. So hey, you never know.
It's true.
Touche,
What I would do,
Yeah.
what I would do is write Dave Grohl a letter like on paper with like a pencil and send it to Studio 606 down in Los Angeles where the studio is, and maybe send like a vinyl with him, with it, like do something, and maybe he's a big Seattle guy, so he might
That's true.
do it.
Never
I mean,
know.
I doubt it. He's a really busy guy. He's a huge. I mean,
Worst thing
Dave
that
Grohl.
happens is he never writes back.
That's true,
So-
right?
No, so I also have another question that I don't know if you guys got show notes ahead of time. If not,
Yeah,
this
yeah.
isn't on there. So even if you did, it doesn't matter. And if you can't talk about
Never
this,
mind. I'll sit back down. This is-
tell me no. But no, I'm actually just curious because we've never asked anyone this. But when you're developing the game, so you guys are releasing on PS5 and PC, yeah? That's the two right now. When you're developing the game, like which platform do you develop natively on, and then which one do you decide to port to generally? Like you can talk about this game or in the industry. Curious about that.
Every game is always PC first, even if you're making a console exclusive, just because it takes time to like deploy to a console.
Okay.
So if you're just like, making a quick change and wanting to test it, you're going to launch it on PC because it's just faster to get that turnaround.
So what you're saying is there is a Bloodborne copy on PC somewhere.
I mean, I would bet that there at one point was a version that worked on PC, but I don't know that it would be a like shippable build. It's probably a build that only works in like dev mode.
Bet it works
So
at 60 FPS though.
there's when you're developing a game, you have like shipping builds and dev builds, which basically when it compiles the application, it changes a bunch of things about all manner of boring technical details. And if you're working on a console exclusive, you probably wouldn't ever configure a shipping PC build. Because when you're working on PC, that's just going to be like for kind of quick checks. But if you need to, like, if you've built something and you need to make sure that it's actually working for like end users when players are going to play it,
Yeah.
you can't call the work done until you push it to your console and test it there. So even if you like test your initial work on PC, you're gonna have to go and test it on the console too.
Yeah, and
The hardware
sometimes-
geek in me.
I was gonna say, like, sometimes, like occasionally, like I've heard of a couple situations where that the PC step is not there in a full, right? Like it can be a very, very stripped down version
Yeah.
of like what is there. So like maybe it's just the ability to construct a level, but then to put the character in the level has to happen somewhere that is compiled. But yeah, it's very much like driven by PC. I think also like I guess if you're making a Mac game, you have to use, at least a while ago, you had to develop it on like a Mac OS. But yeah,
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 and
that-
like a company like Naughty Dog that has been working on PlayStation consoles for since the dawn of time, like maybe they don't have a PC step because their tool chain is so robust at this point that they don't need it. But if you're like a brand new studio, you're probably going to start in PC land and then
Yeah.
slowly move over.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, it makes sense.
Is curious about like because I know the new consoles are running off AMD architecture. When you go to PC, like if you were shipping to PC end users, right? Like you're gonna have people that are all over the place. A lot of NVIDIA, a lot of AMD, that sort of thing, right?
Yeah.
Like how do you know what I mean? Like I guess if you're doing both, like is it just a lot of QA work at that point? And I'm
Yeah,
like I have
and
no
a
idea
little
how
bit
that
of this,
works.
crossing your fingers.
Okay, cool.
well, it's also what makes stuff like Unreal and Unity like so valuable for teams our size, right? Like you look at like number of dev years that has gone into Unity or Unreal, and it's in the hundreds, right? Like, and that a lot of that stability, right, comes from the fact that as a mobile developer, you know that your game is gonna run without majority problem on like a huge selection of hardware.
Yeah, okay.
And that is a lot of that difference is these very tiny little under the hood things that say, oh, shoot, it's an AMD card, not an NVIDIA card. I need to do this one little thing, tiny bit different to make sure your computer doesn't explode or something. I don't know, but
Sure.
that literally takes a huge amount of work, and you couldn't do that 15 years ago, right? Like
Yeah.
there was kind of like licensable 3D engines, but they were very, very early compared to what we have now with like digital marketplaces and it's insane.
What just because I what engine is the game in, if you guys can say?
Yeah, we are in Unreal.
Okay, cool. Gotcha.
Unreal's nuts. From what I don't know how to make a game. I don't know
Yeah.
a whole lot about that.
From experience.
Nobody
Just
does.
looks good.
Right. But like Unreal 5 is, from what I've heard, and Unreal in general is very user friendly. We interviewed a guy named Nate Perkypile, and he worked for Bethesda for a long
I know
time.
Nate.
Yep, and he's making this game, and he's doing it by himself. But with Unreal 5, like I see his post on Twitter, and he's just like, "I did this happened today in the game, and usually my computer would catch on fire, but because Unreal, it didn't, and then I could do this stuff, and like I think that's cool to have like a game engine like that that's so like user friendly and making." I don't know how to word this, but
I mean, the thing Nate said essentially was that specifically was just super friendly to like solo devs and indie devs because it does like there's so, like you said, man, there's so many like dev hours that go into build. It does a lot of the stuff that used to be super difficult and complex, kind of like baked in, I guess, is what he was
Unreal
saying.
is great, but I would not take what Perky is able to do as one person as representative.
Okay.
That guy's a monster.
Yeah,
enough.
I definitely got that vibe from him when we were talking to him. He definitely seems like a like one of a kind of person.
So one of a kind.
But no,
Last
no.
name. I've never
Alex
heard
has
of
been
another one.
working with Unreal way more than I have in his career, so I'll let him actually field the real question.
Yeah,
I mean, yeah, it is. It is. I mean, it is that powerful. Like it's. I think the biggest thing for me is it's accessible, right? Like,
Yeah.
and a lot of the scariest stuff is slowly getting like eroded away, and like it's not always technical, right? Like some of it is legal.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you look at the UDK, right, the Unreal Development Kit, there was there was like one of the earliest stipulations that allowed you to just download it and start playing with it and sell it. And like before that, UE3 had to have like I think it was like $1 million license or something like that. And now like UE4, and then you start to introduce stuff like Steam, right, or the Epic Store, or whatever you want to launch your platform on that has favorable deals to let people like make their own thing. Like it's I had a moment. It was around. It was like 2016 or 17 maybe. No, it was a little bit later than that. But like I got my DK2, like my old VR headset, and Unreal 4 went public, and I just remember like freaking out because it was so cool that like all of this stuff was here and I could just play with it. I could have literally made a game and released it. Like again, maybe by myself and probably not at that quality level, but like I could have, right? Like, and that's what people are doing. And that's incredible. That's like it's insane.
I think I mean, yeah, I mean, that's what we've heard just from the people we've talked to is the ability of some of these new engines and the tool sets that like you just what used to not be accessible to people, especially kind of on solo projects and things like that. Like it, the fact that these tools are in creative hands now is like it's only good for the industry, really. So
Yeah, and
And
educational material is improving, and like sharing and networking is getting made better, and like, yeah, it's all very very positive. Um,
yeah. Back on the Pacific Drive bit of this whole episode,
what's
gotta
that?
focus.
No.
yeah, right.
What are we talking
So
about?
in the trailer, which I've probably watched about 100 times at this point, the, a lot of the driving mechanics are on display. Can you guys talk about like some of the out of the car mechanics at all?
Seth, you want to take this one?
Yeah, sure. So the primary experience is in the car, like as you saw in the trailer. You're sitting behind the steering wheel in the driver's seat. It's a very sort of embodied, immersive experience in that way. But you do get out of the car. It is first person the whole time. Uh, just sort of ballpark number. I think on balance, you probably spend about 30% of your time when you're out on an expedition out of the car, and the rest of the time driving around kind of from resource to resource or whatever thing you're driving to. Or away from an anomaly of some kind. It's not always towards something. But when you're on foot, there's kind of two contexts in which you find yourself on foot. One is when you're out on an expedition, you're in the zone, and there's resources around, there's anomalies around, and you have to get out of your car in order to gather the resources. You can't harvest anything while you're in your car, which makes sense. So you kind of need to go out from the safety of your car into this dangerous environment and gather the resources so that you can keep your car running, as well as like later on unlock new recipes and upgrade your car in various ways. You're also probably going to want to like get out of the car and poke and prod at the world in little ways. Like you only have so much ability to like gently investigate something when you're in a big honkin' station wagon. So you might want to get out and like delicately go up to something and see if and how it reacts to your presence, to the car's presence, whatever it may be. But you don't want to stay out there too long because there's radiation and all kinds of weird stuff going on in the zone, and you're probably not going to survive if you get separated from your car, or if you just spend too much time outside of it in general, it might not go so well for you. And then the other context that you're getting out of your car in is back at the garage, your kind of home base. And there's this kind of like repair and prepare step of the game loop there, where you go to the kind of bulletin board where the map is of the area, and you choose between a few different options for like the route that you're going to drive next. And then you'll get some information about what's on that route and what you can expect to find, and then maybe you want to like swap out the parts on your car to be more kind of geared towards what you're going to be encountering, or you just need to repair it and fill up the gas and charge up your battery, or dump the stuff from your trunk from your last expedition into your garage kind of permanent storage, whatever it may be. Put a new bobblehead that you found in. Just kind of get yourself kitted and ready for the next time that you're going to drive out into the great unknown. So yeah, hopefully that gives you a little bit of insight into what that side of the gameplay is like.
Yeah, so I would say, like I said earlier, as like the person who was probably like a little more skeptical, and after having seen things, I think that like I love games where they allow you to say like quote unquote like do your research at the beginning, right? But then like make a plan based on like what information you have available. So I like this is so like, probably different from a lot of people, but like if you guys have played the Witcher titles at all, if either one of you have, but like I feel like in The Witcher 3 they tried to streamline a lot of like the potion stuff, where you could take it on the fly, so you didn't really need to know what you're going to run into. You just be like, oh shit, bam, and magically Geralt would like mid sword swing chug a potion, right? Even though it didn't happen. But in The Witcher 2, you would have to know, like, all right, like I'm gonna plan to head out to this like monster nest. Maybe it was like Neckers or something like that, right? So like ahead of time, I need to drink these potions in a safe environment where I'm like able to like meditate and get these things down, and it just allows me to like be more engaged with the world. Really, like I felt like I had to be more present and pay better attention to what I was doing. And while it's not as like a streamlined experience, to me it's like a much more meaningful experience because it respects my knowledge as a player, right? Like it's not like one of those things where like, oh, this, if you're not paying attention, here's like a quick way that you can just skirt whatever the issue is. And it really does pay off if you are paying attention and you're being intentional. So I actually think that sounds, really interesting. And I don't know that was like something that I picked up from the trailer. And so no, that's super helpful. And thanks for sharing those details. I think that's going to be of interest to some folks.
And that kind of process of like learning about a world and developing a mental model, like that's on the unsexy kind of systemic game design core loop side of things. Like that is so crucial to what those experiences are. Like survival games are rarely, if ever, actually about the resources. They're just about time. So the way to actually like be successful at them is to develop an understanding over time of how the world works and how you can interact with it and how you can sort of manipulate it to your benefit as well. And I think that's a lot of like what's so compelling about those experiences. So we're making sure to bring a bunch of that stuff in, and then also trying to like ride that line. A lot of survival crafting games kind of out of necessity are a little bit janky because there's just like a lot of game to make. And we're trying to, where we can, kind of sand things down and like streamline things without removing any of that sort of discovery process, and focus our efforts to streamline things just about where things are frustrating, but not as much kind of poking into the world where players are making plans and executing on them, because that's the exciting stuff. And more accurately, it's exciting when your plans go awry.
yeah. Exciting, actually stressful. It's all the same.
Yeah, it was actually one of the really early, like we're talking like really early on in the game's like actual prototyping, and we even like the earliest demo of just like it's trees, fog, and road, we were starting to get feedback that the game was a little bit more intense than maybe it was for me because I'm used to driving around in the Northwest in the dark, but like we've repeatedly gotten that feedback now and have lent into it a little bit, but um the introduction of like the garage as a fixed point where you can go back and you can like you will not get attacked or like assault, like anything bad will happen in the garage, like it is truly a safe base. And the second we got that in there, it made everything so much better because then you can raise the stakes when you're not there, right? And then you can have consequences for what makes it back. And it was a one of the biggest turning points I think in the core early design of the game.
Yeah, and that's kind of where you guys built the roguelite elements in. Once you have that safe space, now okay, like yeah, we can change things as you head out from there. But otherwise,
Absolutely.
it would have to have been persistent if you were just constantly in the world. So
Yeah, I mean, a bunch of the systems that we're using could honestly work in both contexts, but having that like safe sanctuary and like Alex was just saying, like the time in between where we can like push a little bit harder on some of those pressures and stuff like that just creates like a much better kind of sawtooth structure of like it's gonna get really hard for a while and then you're gonna have like an exciting moment and it's gonna get really chill for a while and then when you're ready you can make it really hard again.
yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of that model. Honestly, when you were talking about that just now, it made me think. Listen, I'm a huge dark fan to get that out in the open, but it really does make me think about like, okay, like cool, I've got the safety of like the bonfire area. I can rest, I can relax, I can chill out, and whenever I'm ready, I can stand up, go out into that shit show. We'll see what happens, and we can come back. But I do think that that's a really smart, like I guess maybe as the end user, a lot of times like you don't think about these things. They're like subliminal, right? Like I know them, but I'm not thinking about them. And so for you guys to be able to like really build something based on the science of like, hey, I'm going to stress you hard for like the next like little bit, but you can always come back to like this place once you're through this challenge, or like, hey, if you don't make it, come back here, relax, and then you can try again. It's just interesting to talk to people who are like scientifically building that experience where like I generally would just consume it and not think about those elements, be like, oh, thank God. All right, I found a point. Like, let me go chill out for a second.
It's also really funny to see like different players experience it too, right? Like we have people on the team that are so used to the game that they will like just gun ho like, all right, I'm here and I'm gone again. Like it's time. Like okay, maybe I'll put fuel in the car. Like it doesn't matter. Like I'm just gonna get going. And then we also have the like I actually think I fall into this camp where I will like check everything. Like I will be super prepared and I want as much like I've done X and Y and Z and I know exactly where I'm at and how prepared I am. But and then it like I don't want to say it doesn't matter, but then it doesn't matter when you're out there, right? Because then it's like then people are still going to be experiencing the world, and I guess it does matter in the extent that like maybe the people that are very gun ho uh, may not be experienced the way as someone who's playing particularly defensively, but it's fascinating.
But I mean, to that point, Alex, I think like it's true that kitting your car will help in like an appropriate way, will be really helpful. But I think the more helpful growth in the game is that knowledge growth that we were talking
Yes.
about of like it's more important to know how an anomaly behaves than it is to have the defense against it. Because if you can just avoid the damage in
Absolutely.
the first place, then it doesn't matter what's on your car. So
Exactly.
you get that kind of like mastery process of like, okay, I'm like beginning to understand how these weird things in the zone behave, and I can then use that to actually like maybe use this car part in a way that wasn't obvious initially to like whatever it might be. So I think that part of it is pretty big. And I had another point, and it's completely gone from my brain, so I'm gonna
That's all
stop
right.
there.
So it sounds like the strategy here is, again, I mean, I'm pulling from what I know, but like get good sounds like a real thing. Like just don't get hit. Like, oh, okay, cool. I can do that.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't get into a car crash, then your car's not been crashed into.
Exactly.
That is
Can't
designed
die
for
if they can't hit you. Well, speaking of like the anomalies and things like that, DJ and I were honestly just kind of curious about like what were some of the inspirations for like the events, because obviously like there's some history is probably not the word. There's like a stereotype to like the Pac Northwest and like strange happenings and things like that, right? Just talk to us a little bit about some of the inspirations for like the events and things like that, as you guys were thinking these things up.
I mean, a lot
If you
of
can.
the. Oh, sorry. What was that?
I was gonna say if you can. If you guys don't about that too, that's totally okay.
No, no, we're cool to talk about inspiration. There's I think there's two parts to this, right? There is like the, almost like narrative or inspiration of like the type of story and the type of world. And that's the kind of world where we're looking at, like Stalker and Annihilation. I'm a big fan of surrealistic fiction, right? If you take the world that you know and you tweak it a little bit, right? Like then you reflect back on your world when you get to experience that. And I think that's always been a strong thing for me. And if you look at like the anomalies in like Stalker, for example, right? They're not like they're not crazy. They're not even particularly like different or strange, but they're presented in this kind of simplicity of like, oh, okay, this is like just a simple way that it works, and we put a single word to it, oh God, what was like, I'm spacing on some of the exact examples right now, but like, it tends to be a focus on the story, and like letting your mind run a little amok with it, and having to figure out, okay, like we call it the like the ash pile, but we're not really going to talk about why, or maybe all that's there is just like a skeleton head next to a pile of ash or something like that. So that's like on the fictional side of things, we're definitely looking at those other zone stories and looking at weird surrealistic fiction, weird anomalies. On the design side of things, it's honestly been pretty interesting and creative. And Seth, you can talk more about the actual like figuring out what where we pull from an implementation standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, so occasionally we'll have things that kind of come from the art side, and it's like, oh man, that's such like a cool visual idea that we'll figure out how to kind of make that work on the design side. But for the most part, our process has actually just been like me working with Richard, one of our gameplay designer, and mostly actually just turning him loose to his credit and kind of letting him run with it. And basically we talk about kind of the way that we want them to puzzle piece together in terms of like emergent behaviors that combine in multiplicative instead of overwhelming ways. But from there, it's just like, we're making a game that is a first person driving survival crafting game. There's not a lot for us to kind of look to when it comes to reference points of other games that are doing that and like what kinds of hazards they might want to throw at the player. So, there's some element here of discovery and just trial and error. There's certainly things that are on the cutting room floor that we were really excited about, but for whatever reason, it just proved not to be like, in a test context, like in the test map, Richard puts it down and I load up the level and I drive over the thing and I'm like, oh man, that's like a really cool experience. I like how that plays and I like what it could lead to. But then we see it in playtest and it's like, oh, people just don't interact with it because it's like too easy to avoid. And iterating from there, and maybe that means changing the behavior of the thing a little bit, or maybe it means just cutting it and spending the time we would spend on iterating there on some new idea that our playtests between when we started that other thing and now have kind of informed us like, oh, okay, this is like a behavioral pattern that has been successful and we can kind of double down on, and we can like structure things in a way that we can reuse and combine kind of modular pieces in clever ways to kind of, a big theme for us in terms of implementation is like punching above our weight and getting good bang for our buck for anything we build. So a lot of it, yeah, has been this very like discovery oriented iterative process driven by Richard to find things that offer interesting dynamics on their own, and on their own both when the player is on foot and in the car, and then also can have enough kind of like hooks and edges to sort of interact and emerge in interesting ways with the other hazards that they might end up nearby, or resources that they might spend nearby, or terrain that they spawn nearby, whatever it might be. So it's this very kind of like galaxy brain, like, okay, if we just kind of like throw all these things into a bag and shake it up, what's gonna happen? And trying to make sure that there are pieces that are like creating interesting dynamics and pushing and pulling on all the different aspects of the game in interesting ways when they come together, especially.
I mean, the anomalies from what I've seen in the trailer, I mean, they're pretty varied. And like, there's one where you're driving down a road and there's like these blue bugs, and then there's like what I can only describe as a razor blade going across, and then there's like green slime. Like, it seems like it's gonna be like
wild.
interesting. Just
Right. It's been funny. Like, as you know, I come up with like a design name for everything when to put it into our tracking database. And some of those things have ended up being very close to what the visuals are, and some of them are like, no, really, that's a design name. Do not read anything into it. Let's figure out, like, now that we have a good behavior we like, let's figure out a visual and a sort of theming for it that fits within our world and makes sense within our world. And that's the moment where I say, I don't know, this is how it looks, this is how it behaves. Alex, you figure it out.
Yeah, and that's
Pull up the
where
code
we
for
get to
the
do a lot of the.
You check that out real fast.
Yeah, it's I mean, it's funny too because like you look at like the fictional world of like Stalker or something like that, right? They have like these weird names for anomalies, and we haven't like we're still locking down final names from like a fictional canonical standpoint, right? Because the game is still in development, like we're still writing stuff. But then there's the names that the team has decided on that definitely stand out. But it's fun, and I mean it's when we get to start doing the wrapper that we start to have those really. I think those are some of my favorite conversations where it's like we have a behavior that's awesome, we have like an artist that is talented, and we just get to like, you know, sit down in a room and start to think about like, okay, do we want to pull from like this aesthetic? Is there maybe like a specific urban legend, or maybe even like an emotional response that we want to drive from this behavior? And then what is the wrapper that can fit with it? And I think
Sometimes that wraps back around and it's like, oh, cool. Like, given that theming, we're actually going to add this other behavior to it too, because that gave us an idea that we didn't have when it was a gray ball.
Yep.
I have one more question, and then we're going to wrap things up because we're about to hit an hour and a half. But industry term, what is a wrapper?
Like generally it is like the presentation in which like the player is going to experience something, right?
Okay.
So
Thematics and aesthetics, kind of.
yeah, exactly. So it could be a from a design language standpoint, it could be a dangerous ball that we do not want you to touch, and we want you to see it from far away, and it doesn't move. Well, that could be a lava pit. It could be a floating fireball. It could be a crazy corrupted piece of machinery. There's a bunch of different ways that we can choose to then present that. And usually, in some games, it's very, very clearly defined, right? Like if you look at something like The Last of Us, it's a zombie game, right? And you're either fighting people or zombies, and most of the enemies tend to fall into that category. But for a zone story, weird is kind of the expectation. So we've definitely had a bit of freedom when it comes to coming up with creative solutions. And to Seth's point, we also want to be pretty clever about it, right? Like we can't go in and model this incredibly intricate character and present it with thousands of animations, because we also need to do a bunch of other ones, and we need to get it done pretty quickly. And so the fun stuff is where there is a really cool overlap between fiction and design, like intent and scope. And then we get to come in afterwards and we start to like flesh out the story and figure out, well, how did people interact with it and how does it fit into our world? And those always don't happen in the same order, right? Like Seth said, sometimes after the design part comes in, or after the aesthetic part comes in, the design can come in and iterate based on that. Some of the ideas we've had have been in the narrative for a long time, and have then informed some of the design aspects.
And others were like, you saw something someone did, and you were like, that's fucking cool, and I'm going to write something to where that fits.
Not in a literal sense, but what's probably more accurate is I got creeped out by something that I saw one time, and I'm gonna think of a way to reference that or give it a subtle nod or something like that.
Or I mean, we do sometimes see things like that where like someone sees a bug and is like, "Oh, I thought I saw this," or just like mentions offhand like, I was wondering if this was happening. What if this happens?" And then we're like, "Yeah, what if it did happen?" And
Yep.
Richard goes in and sneaks in a new behavior and doesn't tell the team, and it takes like weeks before they fully realize what's going on, and we're all delighted.
Yep.
That's
And for
funny.
any of the team that is watching, I'm pretty sure there are still undiscovered things. So there's
That's
like
cool. I'm
it's
sorry.
it's been fun.
It's
That's
cool to think
cool.
about as a player who might get our hands on this one day, right? That like there's
Hmm.
shit right now that you guys are building the game and like you might not know is in there right now. So it's neat to have like challenge accepted and try and find it all right or whatever. But cool.
Yeah.
Well, guys, thanks.
Go ahead.
No, you're good. I was just gonna say thanks so much for the time and for jumping on here. We're really excited to be able to talk to you guys and to talk about the game. Um, I know obviously like if I say, hey, what are you guys working on right? You guys are working on Pacific Drive right now, but like can people who want to find find out more about the game, is Steam wish listing available yet? Do you guys know?
Not yet. The best way to get a hold of us is, I believe we have a mailing list up, but also the
We do.
Ironwood tweets is
Yeah.
the
Okay.
best way to like hear any updates. And then we've only been out in the wild for a couple weeks now, but we definitely have a lot of stuff coming up that we're excited to talk about. And all the detailed aspects of that will be shared with there or elsewhere.
Okay. Awesome. Well, yeah, for everyone interested, we'll make sure to get. But at Ironwood tweets, I think is correct. Yeah.
Hmm.
Awesome.
Yeah, and
Yep.
thanks for coming on. You guys are welcome
Yeah,
back
thank you.
anytime. If you guys want
Yeah,
to
this
talk
was a
about
blast.
Pacific Drive or anything else, you let us know.
Yeah, no, this is good fun.
Yeah,
You guys
thanks,
should do
thanks for
marketing.
having us. It was a delight.
I'm interested too, like after talking like mechanics and things like that.
All right,
so
Alex. So all we need to do is spend an hour and a half with anyone that's medium interested.
All
just
right.
take the show on the
Perfect.
road, guys. That's all I'm
Yeah.
saying. No, seriously.
No,
though,
this
thanks for
has
the
been a
time.
blast.
This was a blast.
Yeah,
Well,
and
cool,
thanks
thank
to
you.
our sponsor, Cova Brewing Company. You guys have been awesome, and hope to work with
And
you guys
send me
again
some beer,
in the
Kova.
future.
I'm out.
I'm gonna bring you some, so don't worry about it.
All right, cool. Sounds good. Thanks,
All
y'all.
right, peace, guys.
Thanks.
All right,
Don't
stay
leave.
on.
Don't leave
just
for real.
yeah, don't leave yet.
Don't leave for real. I was like, oh God, no. We said this like we were ending the call. Don't do it.
Yeah, I forgot to mention this. I need to get better at this, but it has to completely upload before I can let you guys go. I'm sorry.